and welcome to the podcast of Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies, a podcast where our international fellows discuss the most pressing issues of today that we're all facing and share their exciting research ideas. We hope you enjoyed today's talk. Thank you for tuning in.
It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Seán McCabe. I'm Head of Climate Justice and Sustainability at Bohemian Football Club in Dublin. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the club, a little bit about our philosophy that underpins the work that we do, then a little bit about the work itself, and then where we want to go, which is what you have in front of you there. It's quite timely. We've launched this strategy document just at the beginning of this month. So we're at the beginning of quite a new adventure. It's brilliant to be here. And I'm really appreciative for the invite because I'm also learning, and it's a real opportunity to kind of get some heads together and think about where we want to go and how we could work together and collaborate on that. And just who we are as a football club, because that's a pretty important, it shapes how we think. Who we are shapes how we think. So, don't know if anyone has seen the French film La Haine about Muslim immigrants in Paris. This our ultra group, the Notorious Boo Boys, made this banner a few years ago, and I really like the photo because I think it shapes or informs how we think about what we're doing. I know who I am and where I'm from. Who we are and our place is really important in how we think about our club, but then also about our work on climate. This is our home ground, or at least it will be for another 6 months, and then it'll be demolished and rebuilt. It has stood in its site since 1901. Dalymount Park, it was the home of Irish football, it was the national stadium. Its record attendance wasn't actually that day that photo was taken, it was some years later, but our record attendance in the ground is in excess of 50,000 people. It was before people could actually count, before Hillsborough essentially. And then we actually went through a crisis. Once the Premier League started to take hold, match of the day in the 70s and 80s, and then the Premier League, our attendance has really tanked. And so at a Premier League, in our Premier League matches, you would have an attendance of maybe 400 or 500 people at the end of the 90s, the early 2000s. But after our own crisis, a financial crisis brought about by trying to chase glory on the pitch, we reinvented who we are and became community focused, community centered. And that has actually led to us having not only a significant, like you can't get a ticket for our home games anymore, which is a great position to be in, but also we probably have the best squad that we've had in a long time. We definitely have the biggest budget that we've had in a long time, primarily through being committed to the community. Bob Marley played his last ever outdoor concert in our venue, which is a significant point. Just throw that in there. We've become quite well known for our jerseys and our jersey sales. Most of them do something, well, they all do something of social significance. But they also allow us to be very clear in what we stand for. And that has won us support. A lot of people maybe think that you alienate people by having strong political views, but actually it's quite the opposite. We brought the Palestinian women's national team to Dublin. It was the first time a Palestinian team had ever been invited to play in Europe. And that was in May 2023. It was one of the most beautiful events I've ever been a part of. And Greta is possibly our most famous fan. She wore our jersey on the flotilla to Gaza it's nearly a year ago now, I guess. So we aim to be a force for good in our community, and if you walk around Dalymount or you walk around our offices, that's up on the walls. We want to use football as a force for good, and it's working. We just completed a social impact survey, and we estimate that the social value created over the past 6 years by the club is close to 51 million, which we're very proud of because we're quite a small. We've a non-playing staff of 12 now, but 5 years ago we had a non-playing staff of 1. It's been quite a significant period of growth, significant period of change, but we've been doing some good things in our community. This is a little match of the day video. Will it just come out here through the speaker? Match of the day came over and did a profile on us a few years ago. This is the beginning of it. It just gives a sense of who we are.
Bowls are special to me because it's run by everyone for everyone.
When they come and watch the team play, they want to see a team that represents them on the football pitch.
Once you're in, you're in. You can't walk away.
Come on, the balls!
Brief football history, Bowes. How long have you got?
We're standing on the 15 acres pitches. A group of guys from the military training college. They all met here in the Phoenix Park and they created the Bohemian Football Club. The name Bohemian symbolised their outlook on life. You're talking about 1890. The idea of Bohemia as this kind of romantic sort of place, but you know, if you look at the dictionary definition of Bohemian, it's someone who lives an unconventional lifestyle. I really like that.
It's a proud working class club with working class values and tradition.
It's more like a family thing, like you kind of know everyone and everyone knows you, and you kind of all feel the same thing when you win or lose.
Oh, I suppose the club is a members owned club. It has been always. You know, when you're a member, you've got to say what the club is and how it should be run, and I think that's always will be the case.
People's lives nowadays are very transient and they don't have the old pillars of back in the day, and one pillar that they do have is still their football club. That football club should become something other than just 90 minutes. It should become something that's a positive force in the area that it's in.
You'll probably hear people that don't go to church on a Sunday anymore, but is this your church on a Friday night? Probably.
You can't overemphasise how much identity has been lost. Like, people used to live intergenerationally in houses not so long ago. Become a cooper in Guinness, make kegs for your whole life. You know, they used to live on a street with their neighbours for their whole life. All of those things are gone, and they've disappeared within 20, 30 years. And the football club remains, you know, and I think that it provides a lot of those pieces that have been lost in one place with one group of people.
So that's broadly what we stand for. That whole documentary, it's about 15 minutes long. It's on YouTube. You can find it. But you get a sense the club has oriented itself. It's always been member owned, but following a crisis of identity, we returned to community back in 2011, 2012, and we're seeing the fruits of that come to pass now. So climate work began in the club in 2020. That's how you say that, isn't it? And it didn't come from it started as a voluntary position. We now have 6 people working on climate justice at the club. It's pretty exciting. But it began, I suppose, I've worked on climate justice for about 15 years. I took this photo in December 2015. You might know that's Mary Robinson on the left-hand side, our former president. That's Al Gore on the right. And this was at a meeting of, in the first week of the Paris negotiation agreements in Paris. This was a group of people we were able to convene. This little report was a piece of work we'd been doing called Zero Carbon, Zero Poverty, the Climate Justice Way. And this was a meeting of some of the most powerful nations in the world. So that's the top, maybe the later works, does it? No. You've got the US at the table, you've India at the table. This is Sharon Burrow from the International Congress of Trade Unions. So we were able to bring together some of the most advanced economies with countries that represented the least developed groups and the small island developing states, and have a conversation about what should climate justice look like in the Paris Agreement. And ultimately, an incredible man called Tony de Bruyn from the Marshall Islands took the lead of this group, and it became what was called the High Ambition Coalition. And if you read about the Paris negotiations, you'll read about the High Ambition Coalition. They basically carried the Paris Agreement across the line, despite like big efforts to sink it in the 11th hour. But what's very interesting about that time was we were discussing very high-minded ideas like human rights informed climate action, or gender equality in climate action, or indigenous people's rights, or the rights of workers. And it sounded really good at that level, but in reality, in my community, nobody understood even the slightest thing about what climate action meant or was or should look like. And so there was such an enormous gap that when we wrapped up the Mary Robbins Foundation in 2019, I decided to get in a camper van and drive around Ireland and talk to farmers about the climate transition, because farming was and still is in Ireland the most intractable climate challenge, because it's the source of the highest amount of emissions. It's also a source of a lot of livelihoods. It's a place where culture holds very strong and there's great identity. There's a lot of bad faith actors militating against climate action, and then there's a lot of farmers going out of business because the current system doesn't suit them. So if ever there was a need for a just transition, it's Irish agriculture, right? And so for about 6 weeks, I just pulled in on farmyards, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I'd get fed, which was amazing. I experienced unbelievable hospitality, but then I also met with people who clearly weren't the way environmentalists described them. They were very open-minded, very keen to find a pathway forward, very scared, though, of a future that didn't involve them. And why wouldn't they be? Like, if you're hearing George Monbiot talking about like machine-made food, that must be him. If you're hearing that you're not needed, or you're a problem, or you're causing the issue, why would you join that side and fight for that perspective? And really, that's where kind of a lot of things crystallize for me. But fundamentally, the concept that like people have to be able to see themselves belonging to the future in order to fight for that future. If they don't see themselves as a part of that future, as a valuable member of that future, why the hell would they even begin to fight for it? And so that work became this piece of research that I did with the Foundation for European Progressive Studies and the Think Tank for Action on Social Change in Ireland task. And it's called The People's Transition. And it was 100 pages long, but you could write it on the back of a napkin. Basically, it says, if you allow people to participate and you genuinely value what they have to say, and then you actually most radically give them ownership of the solutions, it will drive a virtuous cycle of demand that will hopefully see action commensurate with the scale of the emergency that we're in. It was based on the concept of community wealth building, and we'll come back to this a number of times over this conversation. But community wealth building is essentially a concept whereby we can use levers of procurement and other assets to create a demand that can stimulate the creation of good jobs, living wage jobs, fairly paid jobs, in response to the demand that we've created through things like worker co-ops. It's a concept, and I'll explain more about this in time, but it's a concept that grew out of the global financial crisis in the city of Cleveland in the US, and it's growing into a global movement. Basically, there's a few simple pillars of community wealth building, but in general terms, it's about keeping wealth, jobs, and assets rooted in community. It's about using anchor institutions like universities or other places that have significant amounts of procurement and analysing that procurement and figuring out how much of it could be used to generate economic uplift in areas. It's about growing democratic ownership of the economy rather than extractive ownership. It targets those most excluded from employment, and it aligns public policy, finance, and land use so economic development reduces inequality. And then we were saying, if you did this with the climate transition, you could both reduce inequality and reduce emissions simultaneously. And while you were doing that, you'd be building adaptive capacity to the impacts as well. Importantly for us, like, this is a city level planning strategy. It's not a single football club in a city strategy. So we're doing something from the ground up, which kind of, if you want to understand community wealth building, you probably don't start with what we're doing. You'd start with what has happened in the city of Preston, or what's happened in Scotland in North Ayrshire, or you'd look at Cleveland in Ohio. It's happening in Amsterdam now. We're a bit of a unique case that we're sort of saying, we'll try to agitate for this from a football club. When we published that People's Transition report, a local bank took interest, Allied Irish Bank, and they gave me some money to run pilot projects, and this was 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So I picked my community, obviously, because I couldn't go anywhere else. And the sort of process is quite simple, but it's important, right? We started with mapping. If you go into a community and you say to people, hey, we want to talk about climate change, you'll get the same 5 lunatics who've been talking about climate change since 1988, and you'll learn nothing new about the community. Whereas if you look at who's in the community first, and you'll see where the people are who aren't being listened to, right? So for example, in mapping our community, we found one street that had 80% single mothers. 80% of the population was single mothers. Now, if we want any information from that street whatsoever, we probably need to facilitate some form of childcare or meet them as a group or do something that allows them to participate. So by mapping, we could then do a deep listening exercise that allowed us to hear not what people thought about climate change, but what people thought about life in our community. We should not expect the general public to be experts on climate solutions. That would be a really ridiculous way of trying to solve the climate crisis. We should expect them to be experts in their own lives and their own challenges, and we should take those observations away and figure out how we can design climate action that alleviates some of their challenges, but also does something good for the planet. And if we land upon that, that's where the good solutions will come from. In this instance, we proposed a retrofitting cooperative and a bike courier cooperative. Actually, there had just been a really tragic incident where a Brazilian Deliveroo driver had tried to prevent his bike being stolen, and one of our youth players came upon the scene and had tried to intervene, and he got stabbed and killed. And so there was a big tension between the Deliveroo drivers and inner city communities, and so there was a lot of and there still is like a lot of work to be done to take Deliveroo drivers out of precarity and B to address the very immediate needs of the inner city kids who might feel the need to steal a bike, right? So in that there was a microcosm of the greater challenge. All of this is still while I'm just a regular member of Bohemian Football Club. I haven't approached them at all about this work, but I end up having a pint with Daniel Lambert, who's our COO. Actually, he's our chief commercial officer now. He recently changed position, and said, Bose could be an actor within this thing that we're trying to build. And he said, well, if you want to come in and do it, we could. So, again, a community football club allows you to have that permeability between like members and actually people within the club itself. And this is us. You can see it's not a very big stadium, but you can see it sits in the middle of a community. I took him up on the offer, started volunteering a day a week in 2020. And like I said, now we have a team of 6 and they're a really remarkable bunch of people, and what's happening is very exciting. It's important to explain the philosophy that underpins this work, because it's not, I think maybe it's becoming a little bit more typical, but it wasn't when we began. Some of you might have seen some of these slides before. Basically, like, anyone will spot, but I think we've a very set list of things that come to mind when we talk about the climate crisis and sport. And it usually is related to things like heat stress or extreme weather, or maybe supply chains, maybe if we're kind of thinking quite 3-dimensional. And they are all challenges, yes, but they're very myopic challenges, very immediate now challenges. The real impact of climate change on sport is obviously something more like a chronic scarcity of food, mass migration and displacement, increasing instability and civil unrest, and geopolitical fragmentation. And so whilst these things feel like they might be pressing and important, the future of sport and due to climate change will look like this, or this, or this, right? It's passing a stadium and telling a young person what used to happen in that stadium before things really fractured and broke down. And I know that sounds really ridiculous and dramatic, but like, it's hard to express how like catastrophic the situation is becoming. This is mid-April. We're again setting sea surface temperature records. we're on path for a super El Nino. What's really interesting is in my last El Nino obviously brings drought conditions across the equator that can create huge suffering and starvation. In my last year working with Mary Robinson, she was actually special envoy on El Nino when they were building an internal readiness plan for the UN to respond. And at that time, El Ninos were, like up until recently, still do create an average of about 80 million people pushed to the brink of starvation, which is a catastrophically large number. And they were forecasting that that number could increase to as much as 160 million people within 15 years by 2030 time frame. What we're seeing now, because of the cancellation of USAID, because of the Strait of Hormuz and the fertilizer issues that that's going to bring about, the super El Nino that's currently forecast is estimated to put as many as 340 million people into starvation this year. That's like a world-shattering event in terms of displacement, migration, stress on economies. Like we're really staring down the barrel. They'll get more optimistic, but like we're staring down the barrel of I don't have to tell you, but it's worth recalling. And then there's this, which for us in Ireland and for you guys here, like I know it's a hot day today, but if the AMOC breaks down, which is looking increasingly likely, we all end up like Newfoundland, which is not, I'm struggling enough in the heat. Yeah. I don't think I could do that cold. So what can football clubs do? I think it's about supporting a just transition. I think that's our role, our fundamental role. I think a lot of times in sport, we do a lot of navel gazing and trying to reduce our own footprints, et cetera, et cetera. In reality, it's about how do we build a just transition? How do we remember where we come from, which is the workers' playtime, and how do we build our connection with workers back, our connection with communities back, and really support that just transition. We've got 3 rules upon which our philosophy, I suppose, is built or is underpinned by or something. And the first rule is that football clubs should play to their strengths. What do I mean by that? Up until this network of clubs went bankrupt a couple of years ago, the European Football for Development Network, we were a member. So was Lincoln City, actually. So were some very big clubs, Juventus, Paris Saint-Germain, Liverpool, and then some really tiny clubs, much smaller than our own. It was a really brilliant network. I estimated that network was responsible for about 6.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent being released into the atmosphere every year. That's 175 clubs responsible for about 6.1 million tons of CO2, which sounds like a lot until you stack it up against EU emissions. It's about 1/4%. 1/4% is still a lot of emissions, right? We should be working to reduce that. But it's not a game-changing amount of emissions. Like, we won't avoid the catastrophe we're heading for by reducing those emissions 1/4%. There are, however, 209 million football fans in Europe. That's about 1.62 billion tons of emissions on a per capita basis. I know per capita isn't the right way to measure emissions, really, but like, let's just take it as a measure for now. That's 60% of EU emissions. Put it another way, this is our home stadium in the foreground, Dalymount Park. That's Croke Park in the back there. That's our 82,000-seater national stadium for our Gaelic games. And you can begin to see the Dublin Bay in the top right-hand corner. If those clubs, 175 clubs that I just showed you, got their emissions to 0 tomorrow, they would remove exactly that much carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere every year going forward. If we got the fans to 0 tomorrow, that's the amount of carbon dioxide we remove. You can still see the little red box, right? So playing to our strengths means reaching our fans, not being obsessed with navel gazing. Rule 2 is that you have to understand the opponent. And for us, this is very, very fundamental. I'd argue that most of us are like this, right? It's a very Sisyphusian task trying to move the needle on climate action. We're constantly pushing this boulder up a hill, but we refuse to acknowledge that the hill is made out of poverty and inequality and the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis. And so if we solely focus on the boulder and ignore the hill, don't try to even out the hill, the task only becomes more Sisyphusian. If we actually tackle some of these things, we'll start to level out that hill. People's circumstances determine whether they can act on the climate crisis at all or not. And for 15, 20, 25 years, we've spent a lot of time telling people to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, that actually not buying a recyclable coffee cup makes a difference somehow. It really doesn't, right? It's a fallacy. The change that we have to bring about is so fundamental. It's so rooted in how we have extractivist economies that rob from the global south. It's so rooted in a war machine that destroys entire families and generations and civilizations that we've seen. We don't have to talk about it quite as much anymore because it's so evident and all around us. But we can't spend our whole time telling people that they just have to act and small things make a difference. It doesn't make sense. We did a survey as part of our Football for Climate Justice work, which was a European Erasmus funded project that we did with a large number of clubs. You'll see here. So St. Pauli are there, Club Bruges, Ferencváros, Real Betis, Werder Bremen, and FC Twente. And we found out that 43% of our members and fans living within a 2-kilometre radius of our stadium were finding it hard to pay their utility bills at least some of the time. That's a pretty startling finding for us. Right? That means that people are struggling with the status quo. How could they ever begin to pay a premium to move them to a sustainable lifestyle, right? Similarly, I did a piece of work for the UNFCCC in 2022, and we put out a survey that I went out through national governing bodies, went out through Olympic committees, went out through the NBA, the NFL. I think the English League put it out here. Basically, it was asking fans, what solutions can you actually access? Retrofitting, energy efficient appliances, heat pumps, solar power, organic food, electric mobility. We're not dealing with an awareness crisis. We don't need to educate people or tell them what they need. The climate crisis is an affordability crisis. And so if we're to really tackle it, we have to overcome this. The third rule is that we believe, as a fan-owned football club that competes week in, week out with millionaire and billionaire-owned football teams, and if we'd won on Monday night there, we would have gone top of the table. By the way, we're only in the middle of our season, so we have a summer league. It starts in February and runs till November. But we think the fan ownership, we think the communities, if you can own a football club and compete with the best teams available to you, why can't you also do the same with other sections of the economy? Football is a shared collective experience. And rather than looking at an individual or seeing football as an opportunity to reach loads of individuals and get them to reimagine how they operate, get them, guilt them into living more sustainable lives, we have to see football as this. That's 5 million people on the streets of Buenos Aires celebrating Argentina's World Cup victory. Back to the farmers that I met in that camper van, football gives you that belonging, and it's that sense of belonging that if we can tap into it, if we can treat it with the respect it deserves, we can actually create solutions that benefit the collective. And so our focus is to use the economies of scale that exist within football fandom to build community wealth through the climate solutions that we're trying to create. Let me tell you a little bit about our work. It's just a bit scattergun, because we do sort of a lot of mad stuff, and then I'll tell you about the thing that we're really proud about, which is the piece on your table. We do community climate education. So we teach people how to build off-grid solar circuits, how to learn about energy efficiency and enhance their local energy efficiency. And we teach them bike mechanics. We're soon going to add 3D printing for repair and green building skills and building small wind turbines. And people come thinking they're learning about that stuff, but they're not actually. They're learning how to be a community again. And so we do an 8-week program. And by the end of it, they're actually tasked with going out into the community, knocking on doors, meeting people, bringing what they've learned out into the community, inviting other people into the club, and also like offering to do small tasks and repairs and work within the community. Our community education program has now had over 200 people go through that 8-week program. And we have a waiting list of about 200 people. It's kind of amazing. We have a community supported agriculture project. That's our farmer, Michael, and that's his farm out in Beach Park Eco Farm in Clonsilla. Last year we had 50 families getting their veg once a week from from the CSA. This year we're heading towards 100 memberships. The CSA is a member-owned or a membership scheme, basically, where you pay quarterly and you get a veg basket every week. But then there's also an expectation that you go out and help the farmer at certain times, harvests, etc. We've done work with Friends of the Earth looking at how to overcome the barriers that people face in terms of accessing funding for warmer homes. This was after we saw that survey result from the Football for Climate Justice research. We went and tried to do a deep dive, and you can find that report online, and we're still working on implementing some of the findings or the recommendations from those findings. We've worked with the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission to teach people about their environmental rights through comic books that we published, or comic strips that we published in our match day programs that basically explain environmental justice to people and allow them to follow links to remedy if they're experiencing issues that are unjust. We have run that's program I was telling you about around solar and bike mechanics and everything else in our local prison, Mountjoy Prison, which has been a hell of an experience. We run a film festival every year called the Bohemian Environmental Justice Film Festival. Again, just trying to help communities not just understand the dimensions of environmental justice, but also give them ways to join what we're doing. All of these are front doors to invite people in to take part in something that's collective. And we have the European projects. We have the Football for Climate Justice project that's just finished. And we've just launched a Clean Air Champions League, which is a really fun project with air quality monitors at stadiums all across Europe, where we're trying to, you can go on the Air Quality Champions League website right now, and you'll be able to pull up a live league table showing you the different air qualities at the different stadiums. And we'll soon be working with community to place a second air quality monitor somewhere that the community cares about, and that data will also then be live streamed onto the website. All of this is laying the foundations for something much bigger, which is our climate cooperatives, which is the piece you have in front of you. And that's been a really incredible experience working up towards that. This is us, my two young colleagues, Leo and Caitlin, on their first day 3 years ago. We had just blagged our way into an old gym unit in a tower block neighbouring our ground. We'd no money to do it up. In Ireland, there's a tradition called mehel, where farmers would come together around harvest time to help each other. So we organised a lot of mehels and got a lot of volunteers through to help us redevelop the space. And that's our office. We begged, stole, and borrowed everything you see there. We literally had no money to do it. And then the unit across the hall, again, we had to do it all ourselves. It was messy work. We did pay an electrician. But we stripped it back to its shell and rebuilt it. And this is the space now. That's where we did teach the Spark Skills course that I just mentioned to you. We've also had Oxfam have brought 50 climate activists from across Europe over to an event that we held there to learn about the work we're doing. We've had over 40 community events. We've had over 800 individuals come and use the space from the community, which has been amazing. This is all in the last 16 months, by the way. Bernie Sanders and Mary Robinson came for a visit last May to launch the process of building that strategy. Greta came for a visit in November, which was cool. She was too popular. We had to put her in the stadium, and it was one of the coldest nights of the year. And it was quite an experience to see people stay despite the weather. And this is what we've been doing. So we found our home in autumn 2023. We launched our educational program in the summer of 24. We developed a kids version of the program as well that we teach in schools. We've taught it in over 16 schools. We have a bike library and a library of things, which have been really successful, and that's all been teeing us up to launch the cooperatives. So in March of last year, we were running out of money. We never had that much money, but we were running out of what we had. And that grant wasn't going to be renewed, we knew, because there'd been a change of government, the Greens had been put out, and so the climate stuff had been deprioritized. And so went to Community Foundation Ireland and explained that we wanted to build this business plan. They gave us some funding to put towards it. We undertook 2 study visits, one to Mondragon, I don't know if any of you have heard of Mondragon, and one to Cleveland. And then we developed a draft plan in October and circulated and got huge amounts of feedback. And we launched the formal plan on May Day of this year. So at the beginning of this month. Our North Star for all of this work, the work that's contained in that strategy document, is Mondragon, which is in Basque Country in Spain. An incredible village in the mountains called The Village. It's got an incredible industrial base, thriving factories. It's a very remarkable place. You follow this winding road up through the hills to it, and then suddenly you're surrounded by really big factories doing really interesting work. It started as 4 men and a priest called Father Arizmendieta in 1954, setting up a butane canister cooperative. It now employs 70,000 worker owners. It has sales in over 150 countries, works across finance, industry, retail, knowledge. And it has 92 cooperatives and has a turnover of about 11 billion euros in 2023. Its profits cleared 500 million last year. When the pandemic hit, everyone in those 92 cooperatives took a vote, and they all voted to reduce their wages rather than see anyone laid off. If one of the cooperatives does go out of business, as they do from time to time, they relocate all the workers into other cooperatives. The cooperatives are actually set up in clusters, so similar skill sets would move to similar cooperatives. So they do everything they can to prevent people losing their jobs. It's an empathetic enterprise system, I would say. It's far from perfect. For a long time, they had one of the most polluted rivers in Spain. Doesn't guarantee social justice. It doesn't guarantee environmental justice. It just does mean that you have a democratic business system, and what the people care about, the system will care about. That's the idea. Thanks to the funding, we were able to bring 20 people from the city to Mondragon in June of last year. We stayed for 3 days at Ortalega. That image is Ortalega. It's their cooperative school. And we were able to do a deep dive on how the system works. And that was really important, seeing it. We brought city officials. We brought people from local development companies. And they actually saw that there can be this alternative. And in seeing it then, they were able to imagine it in the context of Dublin. Our bridge to all this work, obviously you can't go from 0 to 70,000 people employed overnight, right? And they have a 75-year head start. And that's an easy thing to throw at you. Mondragon, it's about Basque identity. It couldn't work in Ireland, couldn't work in England, it's a very unique circumstance that has led to that being created. Well, in Cleveland, in the US, in 2010, and in the wake of the global financial crisis, you had a situation where the city was devastated. It went from being the home of Standard Oil and the greatest concentration of super wealthy people in America in the 50s to being one of the poorest cities in the country by 2010. And so the mayor's office and the Cleveland Clinic, which is a large hospital group, and the Democracy Collaborative and a few others got together and they went to Mondragon. And they said, what can Cleveland do that could maybe resemble what's happening in Mondragon? And so they brought back the learnings from Mondragon and they created the Evergreen Cooperatives. And so you'll notice we're calling ourselves the Bohemian Cooperatives, which is a not so subtle nod to the fact that we're just trying to copy what these guys are doing. They started a small laundry business in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. And now they have 6 cooperatives. They've over 600 people employed. And they're literally breaking intergenerational poverty in some of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. The laundry has gone from being a 6 million facility that was doing small load to actually displacing Sodexo, who are an enormous multinational. They managed to, Sodexo were running a giant laundry for the main hospital. It went on fire twice. There was no air conditioning for the workers. There was no, like, it was a very, very bad place to work. And the average wage was $19,000 a year. Sodexo, after the second fire, were shunted and the Evergreen cooperatives were brought in. The workers are still making on average $19,000 a year, but now they get a dividend of about $15,000 on top of that. That's transformative. Some of that stays in the company as capital, but it's their capital, and they're able to borrow against the value of it. So suddenly they're able to get out from renting homes. They're able to buy a home because they're able to borrow to buy a home, and they're able to borrow to get a car. You know, we're not necessarily all big car fans here, but like if you live in a suburb of Cleveland, if you don't have a car, it's very hard to survive. And so it's genuinely transforming people's lives. It's making a material difference in the lives of the people. So we brought a delegation of 3 people out there. And again, there's a study trip note that I'm happy to share with anyone. And they had loads of issues. Like it's 20, they think they could be much further along than just the 6 co-ops since 2010. But they made they made mistakes. The pandemic hit them and knocked them back quite a bit as well. But they are growing. They are developing. It's quite a compelling case. We brought back a lot of learnings for Dublin. Culture building is fundamental, right? Like you can't do this unless you can get people to imagine it, and people can't imagine it overnight. Like we could finish this talk today, and you could all go up being like, "Oh, I know exactly what that's about." But I guarantee you, if we all spoke about it, we'd have slightly different ideas of what we just heard. So, getting people together and building a shared vision is really important. Designing for scale, scaling out, not scaling up, is really important, but you have to locate it somewhere. And then ownership isn't enough. You have to train people to be worker owners. People can't just go from being workers to being worker owners overnight. There's a load of skills that you need as an owner that you don't need as a worker. You need to be thinking about the long-term strategy of the company. You need to be thinking about negotiation skills, all that type of thing. And finally, one of the most important pieces, buyouts beat startups. What they learned is that why would you spend your whole time setting up co-ops? It's a lot of work, and you can spend a lot of time working on it, and it can fail. Why not just buy successful companies and convert them to worker ownership, where everyone starts making better money, and it's better for the community? Obviously, that sounds like a mad concept because you need a lot of money to do that. It just so happened that the Community Foundation in Cleveland happens to be one of the best endowed community foundations in the world. It gave them 10 million, and they've been able to leverage that to buy 4 companies, and those companies are now all worker owned. They buy them, they give the owner 90% of the value up front, 10% after 5 years when he's or she's hung around to help with the transition. And it's working. So about the strategy that you have in front of us, we took it home. Don't worry, I'm nearly done. We took it home and we took those learnings, and we spent the last 12 months essentially trying to figure out what a strategy for Dublin could look like. And the document here, this document, it's available online, Building Community Wealth. It's basically a startup plan, a 3-year startup plan from now to 2029. And the idea is it will support the creation of a democratic local economy, a democratic transition economy, if you want, climate action economy, by establishing an institutional backbone, by accelerating education and participation, by creating 2 enterprises, and by putting in place the growth and replication infrastructure, so that if we succeed, and there is a big if with success, but if we succeed, we want this to be replicated really rapidly across Ireland and across Europe. Don't know why that went wonky over there, but basically it should look cooler. Anyway, the model requires about 22 million in total over the first 15 years of its existence, we reckon, to become what it can be. But we think by 2045 we'll be totally grant free. We won't need any more grants. We will be generating the revenues that we need to sustain ourselves. We think at the most conservative level, we could create nearly 300 additional jobs by 2050, with almost 80% of those receiving optimal dividends. That's the best possible dividends, about 15k a year based on current economics. And within 10 years, the model will be retaining 8 million per year in the local economy. So you can see quite quickly the 22 million looks quite cheap by comparison to what it could bring. Why this matters? Well, oh, sorry, that's actually an earlier slide. The cooperative pipeline. So in the startup phase, we're going to build an insurance company and we're going to build a food cooperative. What exactly they'll look like, I can go into in a bit. Well, sorry, what exactly they don't look like, I don't fully know yet, but I can explain the options that we're looking at for both. Post-startup, or maybe if the startup goes really well towards the tail end of the startup, solar and laundry are also on the hit list. We also want to expand our education and participation hub. So we basically have now the Spark Skills program. We also are doing vocational training where we're giving pre-apprenticeship program for green skills. So we have a green skills pre-apprenticeship program that sits alongside our football academy. So if kids don't make it in football, they have a fallback into quite lucrative careers in green skills. And we also have a gentleman called Seán McCabe, who's teaching radical political economy, which can't actually get a seat for. It's totally subscribed, totally fully subscribed, and it's a brilliant course. He's a very, very sharp mind, a James Connolly scholar. And so we're actually going to try to expand that concept and teach, develop like the Brooklyn Institute. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Brooklyn Institute. Basically, again, back to 2010 in Brooklyn, a lot of university professors left their university, started teaching in pubs in order to make the courses accessible to the people who needed the knowledge. And so we want to sort of replicate that. And then a fund for employee ownership, which we hope will be capitalized from the profits from the insurance company, that will allow us then to start buying businesses and converting them to worker ownership. There's some very key fundamentals, including tactical sequencing. We can't do all of this at the same time, so we have to figure out how to do it in parallel. Distributed leadership, we don't want to own this. We want to catalyze it. We want the city to own it. Plurality of ownership is the only way it'll work. Obviously, financial discipline. Everywhere we went, whether it was Cleveland or Mondragon or elsewhere, we were told no margin, no mission. Can't do what you're going to do unless you're making money, right? So we need financial discipline in all of this. And then we want to embed the social and environmental value from the get-go. We don't want to be in a situation where we're hoping that these things lead to good environmental and social outcomes. It should be required. But the basics of it is, and the model that we're looking at points to, and this is a model that's tuned with the most conservative parameters that could possibly go into it, that by 2050, we will at a minimum retain $250 million in the local economy, just through this process alone. That doesn't account for the climate impact, that doesn't account for the social value of doing this. This is just purely from cash in, cash out, your P&L. We'll have 250 million extra in the local economy. We really are not doing this on our own. And I think if you leaf through the strategy, or if you go online and find the strategy, you'll realize that actually we already have this incredible constellation of partners who are all putting their shoulder to the wheel on it. And you can see there's everything from like very big corporates down to like local community groups who are all part of what we're trying to build. It's really exciting. Would be cool to figure out a way where we already have spoken briefly about this, how we could work with the university here potentially and figure out how to build a knowledge base of this work. I should say, and we've mentioned this earlier as well, it's really good examples of community wealth building in Preston, just up the road. In fact, Councillor Matthew Brown, who's had the leadership of Preston Council, came over to help us launch the strategic plan at the start of May. Really real gentleman, and we did inquire whether he could join, but unfortunately couldn't. But yeah, just to say that you've got really good examples of community wealth building in the vicinity, or not too far from you here. Also, Manchester has a very nascent community wealth building project on the way. And that's it. You'll find more information about what we're doing on bohemians.coop. And happy to have a chat, or don't know what happens next.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies. A quick reminder about how to stay connected. You can find us on Blue Sky, LinkedIn and Instagram, and you can also watch the presentations on YouTube. The podcast is available on all the major platforms. Please download, share, and most importantly, subscribe. See you next time.